Understanding class struggle in Marxist theory. Class struggle is a central concept in Marxist theory, serving as the primary driver of social change and historical development. In Marx's view, society is fundamentally divided into classes with conflicting interests, and this division forms the basis of all historical movements. To understand class struggle, it is essential to explore how Marx defines class, particularly in the context of capitalism, where class conflict between the bourgeoisie and proletariat drives society toward revolutionary transformation. Presented here is an exploration of Marx's definition of class, the unique aspects of capitalism that fuel class struggle, the role of the state in maintaining class interests, and the potential for class consciousness to lead to significant social change. Through this analysis, we can see how Marxist theory explains class structure, the dynamics of conflict, and the potential path toward a classless society. Defining class in Marxist theory. In Marxist theory, class is defined by one's relationship to the means of production, primarily characterized by ownership, or lack thereof, and the economic power it grants. For Marx, this relationship distinguishes the two primary classes in capitalist society, the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, and the proletariat, who do not own productive assets, and therefore must sell their labor to survive. This economic dependence on the owners of capital creates a fundamental opposition between the interests of these two classes. The bourgeoisie, driven by the profit motive, seeks to maximize surplus value, the difference between what workers produce and what they are paid. The proletariat, on the other hand, seeks fair compensation and improved conditions. This basic economic structure positions these classes in direct opposition to each other, laying the groundwork for conflict. The historical aspect of class is also critical to understanding Marx's concept. He argues that class divisions have not existed in all societies, but are instead a historical development linked to the creation of surplus production. In early communal societies, where there was little surplus, resources were distributed among members. However, as societies evolved and surplus wealth became more common, those who controlled productive resources began to accumulate wealth and power, forming distinct social classes. Marx traces this development through feudal and capitalist societies, highlighting the transition from land-based wealth in feudal systems to capital-based wealth in modern capitalism. This historical progression leads to what Marx calls class antagonism, as the interests of the owning and working classes clash within the structures of capitalist society. While Marx's view of class focuses on economic factors, later thinkers have expanded on his ideas. Max Weber, for example, developed a broader framework that includes not only economic class but also status and political power, recognizing that social stratification can be influenced by factors beyond economic relationships. However, for Marx, economic class remains the most decisive factor because it shapes individuals' life chances, opportunities, and overall social positions. Capitalism and the origins of class conflict. Marx argued that capitalism inherently generates class struggle, as the system relies on an exploitative relationship between the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, and the proletariat, who provide labor. This conflict is rooted in the concept of surplus value, where the bourgeoisie pay workers less than the value of what they produce, thereby extracting profit from labor. Capitalism thus organizes society in a way that prioritizes profit over the well-being of workers, creating a structural antagonism between classes. This antagonism is not merely incidental but central to the workings of capitalism, making class struggle an unavoidable aspect of the system. Marx's analysis extends beyond basic economic exploitation, incorporating the concept of alienation to explain the proletariat's experience under capitalism. In a capitalist society, workers become alienated from the products of their labor, the process of work, their fellow workers, and ultimately from themselves. This alienation arises because the labor process is controlled not by the workers themselves, but by capitalists who dictate its nature, pace, and purpose. Marx viewed this alienation as both a dehumanizing force and a catalyst for class consciousness, as it starkly reveals to workers their subjugated position within the capitalist structure. Capitalism, according to Marx, also sets itself apart from previous economic systems by the relentless need for expansion and revolutionizing production methods. The bourgeoisie cannot survive without continually transforming the means of production and expanding into new markets. This constant upheaval disrupts traditional ways of life and destabilizes social relations, creating an environment of everlasting uncertainty that distinguishes capitalist society. The dynamic nature of capitalism also makes it more efficient at producing wealth than previous systems, but it does so at the expense of workers' rights and living conditions. This relentless expansion and innovation heighten the inequality between classes, fueling the potential for conflict and revolution. Moreover, Marx emphasizes that capitalism's competitive nature intensifies class struggle as firms compete for profit, leading them to reduce wages, extend working hours, and impose stricter labor discipline. This competition not only impoverishes the proletariat, but also consolidates the wealth and power of the bourgeoisie. In times of economic crisis, small businesses are often unable to survive, leading to greater concentration of wealth among fewer capitalists, while the working class suffers from increased job insecurity and poverty. These cyclical crises, Marx argues, are inherent in capitalism and serve as moments when the contradictions of the system become most visible, thus exposing the exploitative nature of class relations and pushing the proletariat toward revolutionary action. Capitalism's inherent need for growth extends beyond national borders, influencing global markets and deepening inequalities worldwide. This globalization of capitalism integrates workers from diverse backgrounds into a single economic system, further uniting their struggles. Consequently, the potential for a unified proletarian movement increases as capitalism brings workers into a shared experience of exploitation. For Marx, the globalization of capitalism thus becomes both a symptom of its reach and a precondition for a more extensive international class struggle, as the working class recognizes its shared interests across borders. The role of the state in class relations. In Marxist theory, the state plays a crucial role in the dynamics of class relations, acting primarily as a tool for maintaining and reinforcing the interests of the ruling class. Marx and subsequent Marxist thinkers, such as Lenin, argue that the state is not a neutral institution. Instead, it serves the economic and political needs of the bourgeoisie by preserving the structures of capitalism and suppressing potential resistance from the working class. This view challenges the notion that the state functions as a representative body for the entire population, asserting instead that its primary function is to protect property, maintain order, and support the capitalist system. Marx contends that the state arose as societies transitioned from communal, classless structures to class-based systems. The formation of classes, where a small elite controlled the means of production, necessitated mechanisms to maintain this power imbalance. The state emerged as an instrument to enforce the interests of the dominant class, institutionalizing and legitimizing their control. In capitalist societies, this role of the state becomes even more pronounced as it operates through legal and bureaucratic structures that normalize exploitation. For example, laws governing property and contract are designed to favor capital owners, ensuring their continued accumulation of wealth and control over labor. Lenin extends this analysis by examining the specific ways in which the state functions as a repressive apparatus. In The State and Revolution, he argues that the state operates primarily through institutions like the police, the military, and the judicial system to subdue the working class. According to Lenin, these institutions are not merely defensive but actively oppressive, structured to prevent the proletariat from challenging the status quo. He introduces the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat as a necessary phase in the transition to socialism, wherein the working class seizes state power to dismantle bourgeois structures. This transitional state, he argues, would gradually wither away as class distinctions dissolve, ultimately leading to a stateless, classless society. Contemporary Marxist theorists have further explored the relationship between the state and class power. For instance, Klaus Off and Nikos Poulantzas argue that, while the capitalist state generally serves to uphold ruling class interests, it is also structured to manage and mediate class conflicts, especially when facing organized labor movements. According to Off, the state's role in managing these tensions is a strategic response intended to stabilize the capitalist system by occasionally implementing reforms that reduce social unrest without challenging the foundation of capitalism itself. This relative autonomy allows the state to balance competing class interests to some extent, while still preserving its underlying commitment to capitalist priorities. Ultimately, Marxist theory portrays the state as an entity fundamentally linked to class structure, one that serves to stabilize capitalist society by suppressing revolutionary potential. By understanding the state in this way, Marxists emphasize the necessity of revolution to fundamentally transform society and create new structures that serve collective rather than elite interests. Through this revolutionary lens, the state is not an institution to be reformed, but one to be radically restructured to pave the way toward a classless society. Class struggle as the engine of social change. Class struggle, according to Marx, serves as the fundamental driver of historical progress and transformation. This struggle arises from the inherent conflict of interests between social classes, with the primary division under capitalism existing between the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, and the proletariat, who provide labor. Marx argues that this ongoing conflict between classes is not only inevitable, but also necessary for societal advancement. Each stage of history, from feudalism to capitalism, reflects a progression of class struggles that ultimately drive social evolution and bring about new economic and political structures. Marx viewed capitalism as a system that intensifies class conflict, especially as it generates unprecedented economic inequality and alienation among workers. Under capitalism, the bourgeoisie relentlessly pursue profit, maximizing surplus value by exploiting the labor of the proletariat. This exploitation manifests through long working hours, low wages, and poor working conditions, all of which alienate workers from both the products of their labor and their sense of self-worth. As capitalist development progresses, the proletariat becomes increasingly aware of its collective oppression, which Marx argued would lead to a growing sense of class consciousness and the potential for revolutionary change. The concept of historical materialism underpins Marx's perspective on class struggle. In his view, history is a dialectical process, moving through contradictions and conflicts that arise from material economic conditions. As the capitalist system grows, its contradictions, such as the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few and the impoverishment of the many, become increasingly apparent, fostering conditions ripe for revolution. Marx famously states in the Communist Manifesto that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles, suggesting that each historical epoch is defined by the struggle between those who control economic resources and those who labor under them. This cycle of struggle, he argued, will culminate in the abolition of classes altogether, with the establishment of socialism and eventually communism. Marxists assert that class struggle has the power to dismantle the capitalist system itself. Through collective action, including strikes, protests, and other forms of organized resistance, the proletariat can disrupt the mechanisms of capitalist production and challenge the dominance of the bourgeoisie. Marx believed that this heightened class consciousness would lead the working class to recognize its own strength and potential as a revolutionary force. Once workers collectively seize control of the means of production, they could establish a socialist system that prioritizes collective ownership and democratic decision-making, paving the way for a classless, stateless society. Class struggle, therefore, is not merely a product of capitalism. It is a dynamic force that propels history forward. Through revolutionary action, Marx argued, the proletariat can overthrow the capitalist system and replace it with a society based on equality and cooperation. This vision of class struggle as the engine of social change underscores the transformative potential Marx saw in the working class and its ability to reshape society fundamentally. Class consciousness and the importance of solidarity. In Marxist theory, class consciousness, the awareness of one's class position and the shared interests it entails, is essential for the working class to achieve meaningful social and political change. For Marx, class consciousness enables the proletariat to recognize the nature of their exploitation under capitalism and fosters solidarity, which is crucial for organized resistance. Without this collective awareness, the working class remains fragmented and vulnerable to manipulation by the ruling class, who can leverage ideological control to maintain their dominance. Marx argued that the capitalist system actively works to prevent the development of class consciousness among workers. Through various ideological mechanisms, including media, education, and cultural norms, the bourgeoisie promotes a false consciousness that obscures the true nature of class relations. This false consciousness can take many forms, such as the belief in meritocracy, which suggests that social mobility is based purely on individual effort, or the idea that capitalist society is structured in the best possible way. By diverting attention from systemic issues, these ideologies hinder the proletariat's ability to see their common plight and unite as a class. Solidarity among workers is essential to overcoming the divisive effects of false consciousness. In Marx's view, shared experiences of exploitation and alienation provide a basis for solidarity, as workers come to understand that their interests are inherently opposed to those of the capitalist class. This sense of solidarity is critical for organizing collective action, whether in the form of strikes, unionization, or broader political movements aimed at challenging the capitalist system. As workers join together in these efforts, they build class consciousness, recognizing that their struggles are part of a larger historical process of class struggle. Marxist thinkers have emphasized the transformative potential of class consciousness, suggesting that it is not only a means of resistance, but also a path toward revolutionary change. When the proletariat collectively realizes its power and organizes against the bourgeoisie, it can disrupt the capitalist system and push for a socialist transition. This shift from individual grievances to collective awareness of class interests is what Marxists believe will ultimately lead to the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of a classless society. In summary, class consciousness and solidarity are fundamental in Marxist theory, as they empower the proletariat to challenge their exploitation and resist the ideological dominance of the bourgeoisie. By achieving a shared understanding of their collective oppression, workers can move beyond the fragmentation imposed by capitalist society and work together to pursue a revolutionary transformation. Through this process, class consciousness acts as both a source of empowerment and a critical step toward a society that transcends class-based divisions. Ideology and its role in sustaining class structures. In Marxist theory, ideology plays a central role in maintaining and reinforcing the capitalist system by shaping how people perceive their social world. According to Marx, ideology serves as a tool for the ruling class to instill beliefs and values that justify and normalize the existing social order, thus obscuring the inherent conflicts of capitalism. Through ideology, the capitalist class can project its own interests as universal, promoting ideas that make class inequalities seem natural, inevitable, or even desirable. Marxist thinkers argue that ideology is crucial in perpetuating false consciousness, a condition in which the working class adopts beliefs that mask the reality of their exploitation. For example, the concept of meritocracy, widely promoted within capitalist societies, suggests that individual success is a product of hard work and talent. This belief diverts attention from structural inequalities, implying that economic outcomes are solely the result of personal effort rather than systemic class divisions. By encouraging workers to view their circumstances as a result of individual failings or achievements, meritocratic ideology discourages collective resistance and reinforces capitalist values. Education, media, and cultural institutions play significant roles in disseminating ruling class ideology. Schools often teach values such as competition and individualism, subtly preparing students to accept the norms of a capitalist economy. The media, owned and influenced largely by capitalist interests, shapes public opinion by presenting information and perspectives that align with the needs of the ruling class. These institutions act as vehicles for ideological control, perpetuating values that stabilize capitalist society by framing capitalist relations as the natural state of human affairs. Antonio Gramsci, a prominent Marxist theorist, introduced the concept of cultural hegemony to describe the process by which the ruling class gains the consent of the working class to maintain the status quo. According to Gramsci, the ruling class does not rely solely on force to assert its dominance. It also seeks to control cultural and intellectual life, shaping societal beliefs in a way that aligns with its own interests. This hegemony is maintained through the production of common sense, ideas that resonate with the general population, thereby reducing resistance and reinforcing class structures without overt repression. Ultimately, ideology serves as a powerful means of social control in capitalist society, blurring class distinctions and fostering acceptance of the status quo. By promoting ideas that mask the exploitation at the heart of class relations, the ruling class can maintain its position without resorting to direct coercion. In Marxist theory, therefore, challenging ruling class ideology and developing a critical consciousness are essential steps in the path towards social change. By recognizing and resisting the ideological forces that reinforce capitalism, the working class can achieve a clearer understanding of their collective interests, fostering the solidarity necessary to challenge and transform the capitalist system. Intersections of class with gender, race, and urbanization. Marxist theory traditionally centers on class conflict as the primary driver of social change. Yet many contemporary Marxist thinkers have expanded this analysis to consider how class intersects with other social categories, such as gender, race, and urban geography. These dimensions reveal additional layers of oppression that complicate the simple dichotomy between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, illustrating how capitalism reinforces hierarchies that go beyond class alone. Understanding these intersections highlights the multifaceted nature of exploitation and the ways in which capitalist structures adapt and perpetuate themselves across diverse groups and contexts. Gender is a significant factor in the Marxist analysis of class relations, particularly as it relates to labor and the family. Feminist Marxist theorists argue that capitalism relies not only on wage labor, but also on unpaid domestic labor, often performed by women, to sustain the workforce. This labor, cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, reproduces the conditions necessary for workers to continue contributing to the capitalist economy. Thus, patriarchy and capitalism are intertwined, with each reinforcing the other to ensure the reproduction of labor power at minimal cost to the capitalist class. In this way, women's labor is exploited both inside and outside the traditional workplace, as their roles in the household support capitalist production without recognition or remuneration. Race is another critical axis along which class exploitation occurs. Historically, capitalism has leveraged racial divisions to create a segmented labor market, where certain racial or ethnic groups are funneled into low-wage, precarious work. This segmentation allows capitalists to pit groups of workers against one another, undermining solidarity and class consciousness by fostering competition and division within the working class. By reinforcing racial hierarchies, capitalism not only exploits specific groups more intensely, but also prevents unified opposition from the proletariat as a whole. This strategic use of racial and ethnic divisions ensures a steady supply of cheap labor, particularly in industries that rely on low-cost, highly exploitable labor, such as agriculture, domestic work, and manufacturing. Urbanization further shapes the experience of class struggle by concentrating economic disparities and creating distinct spatial divisions within cities. According to Marxist urban theorists like David Harvey, capitalism continuously reshapes urban landscapes to accommodate the needs of capital accumulation. As a result, cities become sites of intense social inequality, with affluent neighborhoods coexisting alongside impoverished areas where the working class and marginalized communities are often forced to live. Urbanization under capitalism produces surplus populations who are displaced by gentrification, denied access to affordable housing, and subject to exploitative labor practices. These spatial dynamics contribute to a heightened awareness of class divisions in urban environments, making cities focal points for organizing and resistance. In examining the intersections of class with gender, race, and urbanization, contemporary Marxists emphasize that capitalism does not merely exploit workers in a homogeneous manner, but instead intensifies oppression by leveraging existing social hierarchies. These intersections complicate traditional class analysis, suggesting that any movement against capitalism must also address patriarchy, racial inequality, and urban displacement. Recognizing these interconnected forms of exploitation is essential for building a comprehensive strategy for social change, as it underscores the need for solidarity across different groups and issues in the struggle against capitalism. The role of labor movements and unions in class struggle. Labor movements and unions have historically been pivotal in the Marxist struggle against capitalist exploitation. According to Marxist theory, unions serve as essential tools for organizing the working class, raising awareness of their collective power, and challenging the authority of the bourgeoisie. By uniting workers across industries, unions create a platform for addressing labor grievances, advocating for fair wages, safer working conditions, and, ultimately, advancing the broader goal of dismantling capitalist structures. Marx viewed unions as part of the natural development of class consciousness within the proletariat. Through unions, workers become more aware of their shared interests and the systemic nature of their exploitation, allowing them to resist the isolation that capitalism often imposes. By organizing collectively, workers gain leverage in negotiations with employers, using strikes, work stoppages, and other collective actions to disrupt production and exert pressure on capitalists. This form of defensive control over the labor process is vital to protecting workers' rights and improving their conditions within the capitalist framework. However, Marx and other Marxist thinkers also recognize the limitations of unions within a capitalist society. While unions may achieve significant reforms, such as wage increases and improved working conditions, these victories do not eliminate the fundamental structures of exploitation. Labor unions can sometimes be co-opted by the system they oppose, particularly when they adopt reformist rather than revolutionary objectives. For instance, when unions focus solely on incremental improvements within capitalism, they risk reinforcing the system rather than challenging its foundations. Marx argued that unions should go beyond economic demands to address the political dimensions of class struggle, encouraging workers to see their struggle as part of a larger revolutionary movement aimed at transforming society. Revolutionary Marxists like Lenin viewed labor movements as a critical force in the socialist revolution, but he also emphasized the need for a guiding political party to direct the working class toward revolutionary goals. In What Is to Be Done, Lenin argued that without a vanguard party to provide ideological guidance, labor movements might remain confined to trade union consciousness, focused on immediate economic gains rather than the broader struggle for socialism. For Lenin, unions were necessary but insufficient on their own. They needed to work in tandem with a revolutionary party to channel class consciousness into a cohesive political force capable of overthrowing the capitalist state. Contemporary Marxist theorists continue to examine the role of unions in an era of globalization and neoliberalism, where traditional labor protections are often weakened and union membership is in decline. With the rise of precarious work, gig economies, and outsourcing, organizing the working class has become more complex as capitalists shift labor to regions or sectors where workers are less organized and more vulnerable to exploitation. Despite these challenges, unions and labor movements remain central to the struggle for workers' rights and social justice. New forms of organizing, such as international labor solidarity networks, worker cooperatives, and advocacy for universal labor protections, demonstrate how unions are adapting to contemporary capitalist dynamics. In summary, labor movements and unions are indispensable in the Marxist struggle for class liberation, providing workers with a means to resist exploitation and develop class consciousness. While they face significant limitations within the capitalist system, unions remain a vital force for organizing and mobilizing workers, building solidarity, and laying the groundwork for revolutionary change. For Marxists, the challenge is to transform labor movements from reformist bodies into revolutionary organizations that strive not only for workers' rights, but also for the abolition of capitalism itself. Conclusion. Marxist theory frames class struggle as the central force of historical development, positing that capitalism exacerbates this conflict by dividing society into two main classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Through concepts like alienation, surplus value, and the role of the state, Marx explores the ways in which capitalism perpetuates itself by intensifying social hierarchies and promoting economic inequality. The state, in this framework, functions not as a neutral entity, but as a structure that upholds capitalist interests by managing conflicts and safeguarding the ruling class's dominance. Class consciousness and solidarity are identified as essential elements for the working class to recognize their collective position and challenge capitalist exploitation. While later theorists such as Weber and Poulantzas have expanded upon or critiqued Marx's ideas by introducing dimensions like race, gender, and bureaucratic influence, these additions highlight the complexity of modern capitalist societies without negating the central Marxist insight that capitalism's internal contradictions may ultimately lead to systemic change. In Marx's view, the outcome of intensified class struggle is the eventual dissolution of class distinctions through a transition to socialism. This trajectory, based on collective ownership and democratic control of production, aims to replace the individualistic exploitation that characterizes capitalist relations. Through this analysis, Marxist theory continues to provide a relevant approach for examining social structures and the dynamics of inequality in both historical and contemporary contexts.